Hello and welcome to the Intelligent Inbound podcast brought to you by SmartBag Media. I'm your host, Jen Spencer, and today I'm speaking with Sam O, who is head of inbound at Lessonly. Now, if you haven't heard of Lessonly, they are a training, enablement, and coaching software that's really built for frontline teams. And in August, Lessonly was acquired by Seismic, and Seismic is the global leader in sales enablement. I definitely want to discuss this, but first, welcome, Sam.
Jen, thank you so much for the warm welcome.
Uh,
Also appreciate your description of Lessonly. That was very good.
glad I nailed it. I'm so excited to chat with you. I want to talk all things inbound, but first, I want to dig into this whirlwind that I imagine that you've been on because you joined Lessonly in March of 2021, and then Lessonly was acquired by Seismic in August. So just outsider perspective, having gone through an acquisition, being in your shoes, I know it can be a little bit of a whirlwind. What has that experience been like?
I've had a few experiences with acquisitions prior.
Mhm.
I had a little bit more of a warning where I was in the organization a little longer.
Yeah.
I will say the one thing that has been unique about this acquisition and is that you can really tell that all of the senior leadership and even the leadership at Seismic has really cared about the transition, how people are moving into
Mm.
roles, being very considerate about what do people do, where to set them up for success. And I mean, personally, for me, I think one of the biggest things that I'm adjusting to is joining a much larger organization. I historically have been part of smaller organizations, so joining an organization the size of Seismic, and then also learning about all the unique teams that have been set up at Seismic has been actually a lot of fun.
Yeah. Yeah, I imagine so, and I mean, I think it was a brilliant acquisition for them, and it makes a whole lot of sense. Um, and I want to talk a little bit about that idea of what you're doing at Lessonly and what you were hired to do or what your intention was to do, and maybe if that's changed at all. But first, maybe let's just kind of back out. I'm always pumped when I see job titles with the word inbound in them. Like that makes me really, really
Mhm.
happy. So can you kind of walk us through what is your responsibility? What sort of team do you have working with you and around you? And then maybe we can just touch a little bit on what are all those, what does the broader marketing universe look like at Seismic too?
Of course. So my role specifically, when I joined Lessonly. So we're still working on integration and what that future will look like. But when I originally joined Lessonly, I served the inbound team. Inbound at Lessonly are two teams. It's our demand gen team and then our inbound SDR team. And having both under marketing and also under a single team is really nice because we can actually look at the entire funnel. So it's not just saying, hey, we're generating MQLs and then we're sending them over to this SDR team and we're trusting that the SDR team is going to do what they're doing. And then, inevitably, usually there's some disconnect. Hey, the quality is not good, or what are these new leads? We don't know how to respond to them. And it's really nice having them all in one team because we literally can talk about it from this is the marketing campaign. This is how we're going to set it up. Hey, inbound team, do you want a new cadence? Do we need to help you with that cadence and give you more
Mm.
background on how to respond to these leads? And what we can do now is we can really focus on the experience and making sure that from start to finish, the experience is very similar. You hear the same messaging and you're not worried about these disconnects that can happen if marketing is running down or demand gen's running down a campaign and not making sure that the entire team who has to respond to those is being informed of what's going on.
Yeah, I think it's really smart. I've always liked to see a sales development role be used as an additional that human layer in a marketing campaign, and also marketing's job isn't just to deliver the quote lead, right? There's more, and so I think philosophically that that aligns really well with me and like the way I approach inbound. So I love it. What how large are these teams that we're talking about when you say kind of you serve the inbound teams? How many
Sure.
people?
So it's about today it's a team of 11. Yes,
And that
11. I always have to think
like
about
between like the demand generation and like the
inbound
SDR
SDR
team.
team.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like
Yep.
the demand generation team is 5 folks, and then the inbound team is 6 right now.
And do you
Including
also have, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say including managers. So I have a manager on my demand gen team, and then a manager on my inbound team.
Hmm.
So we really work together. Um, our managers also have a weekly sync just to communicate and say, hey, this is what I'm seeing, this is what you're seeing. And then I kind of connect the dots between the two of them if I'm hearing something where it's like, hey, organizationally, this is what we have to change, or here's a new strategy or a new product coming down, and we have
Hmm.
to just we have to prepare for that. And how do we get both teams ready for that change coming?
And then do you also have an outbound SDR team that's working and maybe reporting up into sales, or do you not have outbound SDRs?
So we do have outbound SDRs.
Hmm.
We Our outbound SDR team was reporting into marketing.
Hmm.
We with the acquisition, the outbound SDR team actually sits under the sales organization at Seismic. So
Hmm.
our outbound team did move over to sales, but I still sync up with the Lessonly outbound lead, the director of outbound there, at least every other week to make sure we're aligned as far as like this is what we are doing
Hmm.
or named accounts, strategic accounts, and then making sure that she knows so she can work with her management or her manager layer to
Hmm.
make sure their reps are also informed of like, oh, these are the campaigns that are going out.
Yeah. 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 That I mean, the actual like motions are different from inbound to outbound, as you know. But that inbound, like the core content from inbound can be so useful,
Mhm.
if applied to an outbound motion. So that makes perfect sense to me. Um, Now what about brand? How, because I know Lessonly has a very prominent, proud brand, right?
Yes.
Um, how does that fit into the world of inbound, or does it?
So to us, it does in almost everything we do. So to be honest, this is the first organization where I've ever been where I'm running demand and I have a really strong brand to leverage,
Yeah.
and it has made our life so much easier. So from a demand perspective, I love that we have a strong brand. I'm really excited about that. It makes our brand actually flows into almost everything we do. So from our like from the advertising we put together across all of our paid networks and organic, to even in our outreach that we put together and the cadences that we have for our inbound SDR team, you'll see elements of our brand within that. And it's once again, it's about creating this like very consistent, wonderful experience. But it's so ingrained in almost everything we do that our brand is not only in our marketing, it's actually in our people.
Mhm.
So do better work is a big thing about Lessonly. And not only do we like to put that into our product, into our marketing, but we also put it into our culture. So our culture very much represents what you see on the outside, and what we push out is actually what our culture is internally as well.
Well, I'm personally just the marketing nerd in me, and the brand nerd in me is really excited to see how this all plays out when when a company like Seismic acquires a company like Lessonly that has such a powerful brand, and that brand is so embedded in the organization, culturally, from like what through its product to its people and its customers, to see like, well, what happens, and how do you kind of integrate in a way that, and you kind of keep the good, and what do you kind of riff on? And I'm personally, just from the sidelines, like, I'm looking forward to seeing how it all plays out. And I know this is a much bigger conversation,
Yes.
that we won't, or it doesn't make sense for us to talk about now. But I also, I do believe in the power of brand marketing and how it can fuel inbound. It does get hard when you have people who are just always like, how much revenue was attributed from like this one thing. So like, you spent money on this thing, how much revenue can you attribute back to it? Do you find that, or are you just in an environment where it's just kind of, hey, we get it that you're not going to be able to track back to like every little nickel and dime? What have you been experiencing?
I think the greatest thing that Kyle put in place, and I'm very thankful that he did this when he joined the organization, but he made sure that brand received a budget, but not a budget
Mm-hmm.
that was going to be measured to ROI, right? Because brand is one of those things that you really cannot measure. There's no like single metric that you can
Right.
use. You can always try to tie some kind of attribution to it, but I would say the greatest thing that we've done is marketing is also as a revenue team, not a lead team or an MQL team. We are a revenue team. So we look at what pipeline are we generating, and the way the marketing budget is set up is we know a certain piece of our budget is always going to be dedicated to branding, and that as long as the other pieces of marketing are generating enough pipeline and enough revenue, that that 30% is a strong investment, and it should be maintained because we know that it's helping to attribute to all the other success from the other marketing efforts. And that's how we look at it. So yes, you can try to attribute dollars to brand, but it's something that we don't think is worth the effort. And I know it's really, really hard to do. Marketing attribution is in itself very hard to do.
Mm-hmm.
um, so for us, it's really about, hey, we know brand has an impact. We know it makes our jobs easier, but it really does. Like, I can speak to so many projects where we don't have to worry about like, hey, what's the tone? How are we going to make this sound? Because we know we have this strong brand. As long as we write to our brand and we speak the way that our brand asks us to speak, then we are going to be successful because we know we have that strong brand in place.
I yes, kudos to Kyle Lacey, who was the CMO of Lessonly. I think he's now, oh my goodness, I don't want to mess up his title, but he's
He's
got some fancy
SVP
VP
marketing.
title at Seismic.
Yeah.
um, but 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 for setting that up, because I'm sure he had to do some data storytelling to get that commitment, from across the executive team and your board, and it's not always easy. So fellow CMOs out there, or people wanting to be CMOs, this is a really good takeaway to make sure you do set the stage for your team to be successful with some brand marketing efforts, because we know that it does help fuel inbound. So
Yeah, I 100% agree. And being new, joining the organization while the brand was already established, it made my life so much easier because like we could say, hey, we're Lessonly, and people did recognize what that meant, and they recognized the llama, and there were so many things that kind of stood out. So I just even remember joining the organization. People were like, oh, I'm so jealous you're a llama. And I was like, I didn't even know you knew what that was, but I appreciate that comment.
isn't that great? Oh, that's awesome. I think one of my favorite kind of brand moments was, we talk about, we're an intelligent inbound marketing agency, and we kind of try to coin that term intelligent inbound because, smart bug and inbound, and
Mhm.
you can see what I was doing there. But I had a prospect on a sales call say, like, talk to me about what he wanted to buy, and what he wanted to buy was, he wanted to buy intelligent inbound. And he was saying it like it was just this thing that you could just buy at a store on a shelf. And I'm like, yes. Oh my gosh,
Yes.
someone's like speaking back to me our brand messaging. It's beautiful.
But it makes your inbound world so much easier because people are
Ab-
coming and saying, I want this thing. And they already recognize it by name. So you're not
yeah.
having to, you know, educate and fight that piece of the awareness is what I always kind of talk about. And
Mhm.
you think about like especially in SaaS, there are so many tools. It doesn't matter what category it is. There are so many tools. There are the big players, but I feel like every day there's a new player that enters into every single market. So cutting through that clutter, being able to establish your name in the mind of your buyer is one of the biggest challenges for all marketers today.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So that's actually a really good segue. And I'll invite you to kind of answer this next question, whether it be from the perspective of leading the inbound team serving, I should say, serving the inbound team, as you said, at Lessonly, or if it was another organization, because I know you haven't been at Lessonly, for too long now. But
Mhm.
can you share like one of your most successful inbound marketing efforts that you've ever had?
Yeah. So one of the most successful inbound efforts I've ever had and it was kind of funny because it wasn't fast. But I was part of a startup and we worked for a really niche industry. So our TAM was not very big. We
Mhm.
served HOA management companies and HOA boards. So there's only a subset, and there's no targeting that narrows down to that small of a niche. So even if you tried, you wouldn't be able to do that. And we were looking at all these different paid efforts and realizing that this industry wasn't online. We could not find them. And so we said, well, let's invest where we think we can own a channel and do it better than our competition. So we actually invested in SEO of all things.
Mm.
Super slow growth, kind of hard to build. But we continually committed to, hey, we are going to create a content calendar and we are going to stick to that content calendar and we are going to produce content. And what we saw is over time, this growing of traffic, but the traffic started converting and we started
Mm.
generating leads. And all of a sudden we start seeing, hey, this is a channel that, yes, we're investing time, but we're not putting budgeting dollars into. And it turned into our most successful channel. But it did take time. And that was like one of the hardest parts of that strategy was that it wasn't that immediate return. So it was more of a kind of a slow growth, but then like through optimization, testing on the website, we figured out how to turn it into this like great source of not only leads, but opportunities for our sales team.
That kind of build it and they will come mentality of being that like go-to place, that resource, which I've noticed, can happen faster if it's a really quiet space and there's no one delivering a lot of educational value. Your competitive, your competitive landscape. When you say took a lot of time, what are we talking about? Months,
Uh,
years?
it took about a year.
Yeah, yeah,
And luckily for us, we became that kind of thought leadership space because we didn't see anybody else doing it.
yeah,
So the hardest part about it was the waiting, right? It was
yeah.
working with leaders and saying, "Hey, we still think this is the right strategy. Please give it more time." Because that is the hardest part about digital marketing is folks are like, "Well, can't you put money into like paid and then immediately start generating leads there?" And it's like, yes, but the quality might not be there, and we don't
Mhm.
know. We've got to figure out the budget and really figure out like what our costs should be. But SEO was just that thing where we were like, we know we can do this. We've got the right team to be able to do it. And if we commit to it, we can make it like our biggest channel. And then we can use that channel to kind of subsidize some of our other testing efforts because we know we're not putting additional advertising dollars into it. Instead, we're just kind of like using our best practices and writing unique content to try to draw people in. And we know once we have that channel solidified and it's driving consistent volume, then we can start adding more channels into it. It was definitely one of those challenging things. And I think another story I'd love to say is that and this is why I really appreciate being able to serve both our demand and inbound team.
Mhm.
Um, we can look at the funnel and actually optimize both ends of the funnel now. So even at Lessonly, we've been able to come in and working with my manager, uh, and who leads our inbound SDR team, look at the lead funnel and the process and go, wait, are we overcomplicating? Can we remove steps? How do we better qualify our leads so that we can set up better opportunities for sales? And, you know, and I think a big thing that we've been also able to do and be very successful at is we have a very good onboarding program. Um, we've had to hire this year, ramp up reps, and we're doing it highly successfully. And reps are producing 1 week out of ramp time, sometimes even during
Yeah.
ramp.
I imagine you're using your own product for
We
that.
are.
Yeah.
It helps that this is
Yeah.
what we do.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
but it's been great.
yeah,
And like I'm, part of the acquisition, of course, like you are always nervous about any acquisition, about your future and things like that. And I'm not gonna lie, like I have those days where I'm like, I don't know what my future is gonna be.
yeah,
Um, but I will say, like, having access to all the right tools, having um, the right tools, the right systems in place, having very good training and onboarding has been super helpful for my time at Lessonly. And I think part of it is that's what Lessonly does, and this is what we excel at. So I I think it really helped me personally as well, like ramp even faster than I
yeah,
normally would have.
yeah, I am sure. That example that you shared with the other startup that you were at that kind of served that HOA market and having to go in and say, "No, we need to have a year or we need more time and this is why." What what do you think made you successful in getting that buy-in? And that approval, because what I've experienced, if I know, okay, I've done it in the past and I have this track record of success, it's it's easier for me to go into that next organization and say, okay, this is what I did, like this is what how long it took and this is what the results were, right? There's that track record of success. But if you don't, are you just recognizing if you don't have that, if you haven't had that opportunity, how do you convince a team that doesn't maybe even understand marketing that well? How do you convince them this is the right, that to stay the course, right? And to give it time. Any tips for folks that are listening and might be like, I'd love to do this, but like there's no way my team will agree to let me run that kind of a quote experiment for that
Yes.
long.
So a little bit of this is getting buy-in in your own team. Um, and how do you get that buy-in from your own team that this is the right strategy? And that's where I think you always have to start is
Yeah.
if your team is bought in, then you're going to get that execution that you need to be successful. Because like you can have all the ideas in the world, but without that execution, it's going to be really hard to get the results that you're looking for. So making sure my team understood the strategy was kind of step one, like why we're going down this route. The other piece of it was looking at different options and being able to say yes or no and give the why. So that was the most
Mm,
important part was here's why we are focusing here, because if we focus here, this is what we're saying, this is what we're seeing. So I actually started with here's why we're not going with all these other channels. Uh,
mm,
and why putting money into these channels was not going to be a smart investment. So I almost like kind of eliminated all the other channels and left one to say, hey, at least here, if we make an investment, we're not going to be adding all this additional cost onto it because we're not going to be paying for traffic that we don't think is there. And a lot of that was actually like the advertising platforms give you all this like insight, and that's actually what was really helpful. Is we started looking at what do we think the highest keywords are that we might set up in a paid search account. They give you an idea of how much traffic that might be, And then I was able to just kind of like turn that around and go, so this would be a large investment for a little bit of return. And I was actually able to use the data presented within the tools to say why we shouldn't use that channel.
It's brilliant, really thoughtful data storytelling, folks. If
Yeah.
there's one kind of skill I would say make sure as a marketing leader you can hone, it's the ability to tell a strong story with data. Because to your point, Sam was like, yeah, you had access to all the right information, but you do have to kind of weave it together and like state your case and with confidence too, right?
Yeah.
And listening to what you found, what you uncovered was your recommendation was the smartest move for the organization, right?
Yeah.
And the fact that, but you only know that because you did your homework.
Yeah. And I think the other piece of it for any leader is you're never going to have 100% of all the data, right? So
True.
the
Yeah.
best you can do is present the clearest case with the information that you do have, and then make a recommendation. And the other piece of it was being willing to accept if it wasn't going to work. That was something that I kind of went in with my leadership, and I said, hey, if we don't think this is going to work, we are going to not. It's not like we're going to do it no matter what. We want to see success building in this channel, and we know it's going to take time. And we did get a few wins right away, so that helped. But we also had the mentality of, if this doesn't work, we're going to shift fast.
Hmm.
And that it wasn't like, hey, this is our one and only strategy. And I think that's one of those things that, like, if you are part of a tech company or a startup company that is moving quickly, that ability to look at data, say what is going to work and what is showing signs of not working, and being able to move quickly away from that is probably one of the best skills you can kind of hone in your career. Because it could be, hey, this strategy has worked for years, and then all of a sudden something changes, like Facebook when they changed their algorithm.
Hmm.
That completely changed our business at a different company I was at, where Facebook was one of our biggest channels until they changed their algorithm. And then we realized, oh, that totally wiped out that entire channel in overnight, pretty much.
Yeah, marketers, we're kind of hoarders sometimes with like all of our campaigns and our tactics. Like we have a hard time letting go of things, especially if we've put a lot of time and energy into them. It's like, oh, all of that work, you know. Um, but sometimes, yeah, you just have to hit delete on some stuff, and be prepared to pivot based off of what you're seeing and like the setting milestones for yourself. Not everything's going to be as catastrophic as an algorithm change that wipes out a channel, right? Like that happens. But sometimes, you have to be able to set milestones and look at, hey, wait a minute, like how are we trending and what's going up and what's staying flat and what's going down. I love to ask people about their dashboards and being the head of inbound. If you are only able to view one dashboard every morning, that tells you how healthy the organization is, like in the role that you play in your organization. What do you need to have on that dashboard?
So I actually have that dashboard.
Of
um,
course you do.
so luckily, we as we've kind of set up our campaigns, and I'm lucky because I adopted a lot of these things, so I'm very thankful for that. But our dashboard for my dashboard for myself has everything from MQLs to, we call them, they're basically new opportunities. So our inbound SDRs do create a new opportunity. They're qualifying the MQLs. They just don't set appointments. They actually go through the process of qualifying. And um, so I have a view pretty much of my entire funnel, from MQL to opportunity to what stages they're moving into, to the pipeline that's being created in that quarter, to the forecast of what sales is saying that they're going to commit to, as far as like how those opportunities are closing in quarter, and then all the way down to revenue. And then I have it broken out by our segments. So it gives me just a very high level, but like a big enough view to be able to say, hey, what's going on with our MQL to opportunity rate? Like, did we introduce a new campaign that may be hurting our ability to qualify opportunities?
Mm.
Or if it increased, what did we do?
Yeah.
It just gives me that little bit of insight to say, like, hey, something changed. I'm noticing a behavioral change in our funnel. And then I can go to my team, and I can ask my team, hey, what did we do? Because clearly something changed from this date to this date, because I'm seeing a large increase to the rate at which we are qualifying leads.
Mhm.
So something must have changed. What was it? But that dashboard is, and it's kind of playing that fine balance of like, I don't want to get too into the weeds because then I get blinded by the amount of data that I'm looking at, but I need enough to be able to at least like start my questioning and start my like, hey, what's going on here? Whether that be good or bad. But
Mhm.
that's really what I rely on, is just that like high level, okay, what am I seeing this week? What does it look like versus last week? And just enough to be able to ask those questions. And then, working through my team to try to like figure out what happened. So
Yeah.
that to me is like the best way to have a dashboard. I've seen dashboards that are like so big, and I ask people, what do
Mhm.
you get out of this? And a lot of the times they're like, well, I only really look at these three things. And I want to ask, like, then can't you get rid of like everything else? Because you're only
Yeah.
really looking at this. But I get it. Like, it's the tendency is always to have more rather than less.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, for sure, for sure. But I think, and I think it takes some time for folks if they're like settling into a new role in an organization to figure out what are the metrics that matter. And because every business, has different motions, and so the one that has the perfect kind of layout and reports for you might be completely different for somebody else, and that's okay.
Yep.
So, but it's yeah, what matters most, and whether you're looking. I don't know any really solid like inbound marketer who doesn't is not looking every day, right?
Yeah.
Some people are looking every hour, and maybe they need to simmer down. But you're looking kind of every day and seeing what's moving forward, and then kind of looking at, well, what do you want to dive a little bit deeper into, and we have those capabilities to do that, but you don't need to be drowning in that. I mean, I've been caught up in it myself, where I just jump down this rabbit hole of data and start digging around, and then I'm like, wait, okay, whoa, I got to take a few steps back. Like, what are the trends? Like, what's really going on, and is this the best use of my time? So I hear you.
Yeah. The other thing that I've learned about myself is I will also have that tendency, and where I'm diving into this thing that I see, and I've learned to take a step back, ask my team first, because sometimes I will dig into something and they will stop me and be like, we know what that is, don't worry about it. It's
Yeah,
actually a really small thing, but you're going too far into it.
yeah.
But having that additional context for my team is actually probably the best lesson that I've learned, is that if I'm seeing something, I need to go to my team first, get additional context, because I'm probably missing something just by looking at the data.
Hmm.
And that usually is some sort of additional context, because it could just be
Hmm.
like, oh, that was a test we're running. We're not running that test anymore. So, like, please don't look at that
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah, well, actually, so testing's interesting. I love experimentations. Some of our guests have said to me, "Yeah, Jen, all marketing's an experiment." Yes, I know, but I love to hear about a marketing experiment that you've run, whether it was at Lessonly or somewhere else. Something that you went, "Hey, let's just try this." And what were you hoping to accomplish, and how did it go? Was it successful, or was it not so much, and not something you would do again?
Yeah. So, this is actually a really funny test. I ran this. The company I was at was a B2C company. So, high volume. And we had these like tried and true templates for emails. And we used them. We had a recommendation engine in them, and then we got a new leader, and it was really funny because I remember the statement, and I was like, "That's a strange statement." And all she said was, if you have more links on an email, you will get more clicks. And that was just like, that was it. So we kind of took that and we were like, well, what if we made a template instead of showing like 6 products? What if we made a template that shows 12? And and so we set up this test, and we had our tried and true, and then we had the great thing about this organization is we had our homegrown recommendation engine, and so we could tweak it. And so instead of saying, hey, give me the top 6, we actually said, give me the top 12.
Hmm.
And what we found, which was like shocking, was that that one statement was true. The designs, the layouts actually weren't that different. We just had more things that you could potentially click on in an email. And it was so successful that we just started moving all of our templates that way and adding more products to show. Because we always had this like assumption that it was it's the I'm missing the phrase, but basically when you're overwhelmed by options, you won't take an action.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, and we thought if we gave somebody this giant creative in their inbox, and we were a crafting company, so like our audience was women 60 to 65 years old, retired, and we were like, we are going to literally paralyze them
Yeah.
because there's going to be too many options for them to choose from. And that was an assumption, not proven, not tested. It was just an assumption. And by moving our template, as small as it sounds, we actually completely changed the channel and made email a bigger revenue contribution than it was prior, just from a simple layout change. But one that came from a very like kind of sidebar comment of, if you just add more links to an email, it will perform better, which when you hear it, you're like, I guess, but that like it doesn't
Yeah.
seem very scientific. It doesn't seem like there's a lot of research behind that. But it was so successful for us.
That's really cool. And no, I love that. I love that. And it's so funny because you could run that same experiment in a completely different business, different industry, different market, and the complete opposite could be true, right?
Yes. Yes.
So, which is just that's what makes kind of real like persona based like campaigns, really understanding your audience. You had a recommendation engine in your product,
Hmm.
right? So what was being served, I'm sure, was everything was really relevant to that individual. So there's a lot there, but that's a really cool. A really cool example of something that you said. Like it was just like this like side conversation, this one statement, and that you went, okay, like let's think about the design of some of these emails and how
Yeah.
maybe we can test them. And you do it once. Here's the thing: is like let's say it didn't work, what do you have to lose?
Right.
Right?
Well, and
Right.
that's the great thing about testing.
Mhm.
And even Google Optimize lets you limit the risk. And that's why I always laugh when organizations are like, we don't feel like the risk is worth it. It's like, but no, limit it. Like if
Yeah.
you can't test with like 30% of your traffic, or if you don't feel comfortable doing 50-50, go to 30, go to 10.
Yeah.
But get some learnings. Like
Yeah.
I think the hardest thing for marketers is because we thrive on success, any little bit of success we will hold on to. And anything that might challenge that success or threaten that success, we get nervous about pulling traffic away from, because we're like, but that's where we're really working well. And it's like, but are we missing another opportunity because of that?
Yeah.
Are we not looking at other channels? Are we not looking at different campaigns or messaging because we're so afraid of losing this success and not not being able to hit our numbers because of that? And I think like something that I've been very thankful for is a lot of my managers have pushed me to take those risks and
Yeah.
to not like sit on, hey, this is what's working today, but think about, this is what's working today. What could we try and what should we try and continually try to make it better, so that we are not, that we're improving every single day, and we're not just like sitting on this is what's been successful for us forever.
It's a really good point that you make too. Like culturally, the environment needs to be able to support that kind of experimentation and having, top down support there. And it's something I don't think a lot of marketers, like when you're applying for a job, you're interviewing for a job, you're being recruited for a role, don't think it's something that a lot of marketers are asking about in that interview process. And I think it's really important because it can be very debilitating as a marketer to be in an organization where you don't have the freedom to experiment in the way that you need to in order to truly be successful. So I just can't underscore that enough. And you're right. I mean, if you don't have the manager there that's supporting that, or the executive team supporting it, it can make or break your success in that organization.
Definitely. I mean, that psychological safety is so important, to feel like it's okay to make a mistake.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
I remember early in my career, I don't know where it came from, but I was always terrified of mistakes.
Yeah.
And then I started making them, and I had good managers that were like, "Hey, what happened?" And as long as I could say, "This is what happened. Here's what I'm going to try to do in the future to help prevent these." But I always had that manager that gave me that psychological safety as well, to say like, "Hey, you can mess up. It's just as long as they are not these giant catastrophic errors, or you understand what happened, and in the future you know how to look out for those things." That's what they really wanted from me. It was to like take these as learning lessons, as opposed to like, "Oh, you made this mistake, this is going to look negatively upon you forever." It was like, "Hey, what happened? Okay, let's talk through it. How do you like help stop this in the future?" And I've been very lucky that way. I feel like, I know not everybody has a manager like that, but I feel like I've been very lucky in my career that I've had a lot of managers that are like, "You made a mistake. Let's talk through it. And this is what I want you to learn from that mistake."
Hmm. Yeah. Well, hope the world continues to build more people that share that point of view, because it's how we all grow.
Hmm.
Um, I have one more question for you,
Yes.
Sam, before we kind of let you go. And it's just asking you to kind of like dream really big and pretend that, as a marketer, just pretend time and money are not an issue, which I know is hard. Want to know, what is this, like the marketing campaign or tactic? That's something that you've just been itching to try that you just haven't necessarily had the time or space to do.
Yeah. So we actually just recently moved over to a named account model with our sales team, and we're getting ready to launch ABM. And the scariest thing about ABM is you can't scale one-to-one campaigns.
Yeah.
They're just super
Yeah.
hard to do. Like, you're going to get really personalized and really go after a person, and you are going to, coordinate between sales, the SDR teams, marketing, and even the executive team. You cannot do that at scale, right? So it's being able to pick those handful of accounts that you really want to try this on. But in my ideal world, like if time and money and budget were not a problem, I would literally do a campaign that mixes both digital and offline marketing.
Mhm.
So, part of, I think, one of the challenges every organization faces is like, how do you break through, like, and become a company that is recognizable? When you think about like all the media we consume every single day, and especially if you are targeting like leaders, the number of offers, emails, cold calls, leaders are getting in these organizations, to be able to put together like a very one-to-one campaign, but also incorporating possibly like out of home advertising. So if you know generally where the office is, can you start to run ads outside of the office?
Mm.
You do geofencing and start targeting people who are coming in and out of the building, uh, and being able to combine that with a digital push and a personalized push where you have leadership outbound, your AE and all marketing saying the same message to this person. Like I always think about could you actually put a billboard outside of the building that has their name on it? And try to get their attention that way. And this is all just to kind of like break through the clutter,
Yeah.
right? And to be like, whoa, this company literally put a billboard outside of my office that says my name on it. I probably should pick up the phone when they call. But you know, to go to that extreme would be so interesting and so
Yeah.
fun and like totally unscalable, and no one would ever approve a billboard with someone's name on it. But it just that's kind of like, when we think about like how to personalize and how to create that very unique experience, like I would think if we were targeting an enterprise, like a global organization with tens of thousands of employees, and you somehow figured out which office, the CFO faces out to, or what window or what street, and there was a billboard there talking to the CFO about the ROI of your organization, I feel like that would get his attention, or his or her
Yeah.
attention,
Yeah.
because you would be like, what is this company? What are they doing? And why did they spend the time and money on this billboard? But when they get the phone call, when they get,
Yeah.
possibly a mailer, that outreach, I would think that, at least me personally, if I saw something like that and then I got like a outreach from an SDR or an AE, I would probably respond to that and be like, what do you do? And how did you know I was here? And
Yeah.
thank you for the billboard, but that's weird. But it's just to do that crazy thing that is unexpected and, really separates yourself from everybody else. And I think that is one of the biggest challenges now for marketers, is whether you're B2C, B2B, it doesn't matter. Good marketing is about personalization and being able to provide the right message, but also being able to cut through that clutter. And that to me is one of the most challenging things, because it doesn't matter what organization you're in. There are so many options, so many different companies, and then just a general lack of awareness that you may even exist. I always think about Seismic. For as large as Seismic is, I started talking to friends and they were like, oh, we just found out we use Seismic. And I'm like, how long have you been using it? And they're like, oh, for like a year. I just never knew what the name was. And I'm like, wait, you don't even know the products you use? But that's the clutter, right? We
Yeah.
have access to all these tools and we may not know what the names of them are, but we're using them. They're highly effective, but we don't think about it that way. And those salespeople as individual contributors will one day become leaders, and hopefully they retain that name. And as they think about like their tech stack for their own teams, they start to add that in. But yeah, if I had my no budget, no timeline, I would try to get attention both digitally, through personalized outreach, but also trying some crazy things like billboards and things like that.
Yeah. Billboards and sky. Oh my gosh.
Skywriting.
Yeah. Skywriting messages. Like, what is the word? There you
Yeah, the,
go.
the planes with the big banners that they drag through the.
Yes. Yeah. I love it. I love it. Can't wait to see it happen. Sam, thank you so much. This was so great. Thanks for joining me today. If anyone listening wants to learn more about you, connect with you, hear what's going on at Lessonly, where do you want them to go?
Definitely LinkedIn is the best. I'm very open on my LinkedIn. I accept most connection requests, and then through there, I'm always happy to. I am trying to get better at sharing my own content and sharing content in general. But I am very responsive on LinkedIn, so it's the best place to reach out to me. And I am also open to having phone calls and things like that. I am trying to do my best to be a good steward for marketers.
Wonderful. I love it. And folks, if you connect with Sam on LinkedIn, let him know you heard him on the Intelligent Inbound podcast. It'll give him the context for like what so he knows what you already know about him. So Thanks everyone for listening. Please do join us next week for another episode of the Intelligent Inbound podcast. You will meet another industry expert who, like Sam, is challenging the status quo for inbound marketing. And if you learned something today, please pay it forward by rating and reviewing us on your podcast listening platform of choice. Make it a great day, everyone.
Thank you, Jen.